Because you feel bad that, it's like people come in and they take things. We are the great, great, great granddaughters of Pierre Pauquette. We did find that out. I want to say that when we were old enough to kind of comprehend, but we were still pretty young, like 5 or 6. And I'm 12 years older than Elizabeth. And our dad, he's got black hair. He always got super tan. And, but our mom, told us, a little bit about our history. But our dad more so just kind of lived that way. And we didn't do like traditional, ho-chunk things, but our dad was always outside, and we were always outside with him. He taught us all the names of the trees, and he also was always very adamant about telling us that we always had to treat the animals with respect. And so there was things he kind of just did, but we didn't know that was just who he was. And so those kinds of things, our mom would kind of joke a little bit once in a while that was probably, what she said, what might have been the Indian in us or something like that at the time. So that's kind of what we knew at that age. And then as we got older and had classes in school, that's when we kind of started learning more about the fact that we were related to Pierre.
I don't think that I found out about any Native American heritage until I had to do a school project, and I want to say it was probably 4th or 5th grade. And that's when Mother brought out she had a big long sheet, and it was like, all the different branches out and stuff. And so she only had a limited amount of information too. But yeah, it was like Mother was the one who was more interested in talking to us about our heritage, not really our dad. And through our grandma, we would hear too that our grandmothers, they didn't talk about it. They didn't want it to be known that they were part Native American. And so even though she could understand the language, our great-grandma, Emma, she could understand everything, but she would never speak it. She would never speak the language. So, so a lot of it gets lost that way, too. Yeah, because it wasn't good to be, Yeah. It was kind of more just quiet and behind the scenes. And that's what I think. I think it was more because it was, it was hard to be a part Native American, especially when they're trying to wipe you out and take your land and, and things like that. So I think that's more of the reason. Yeah, it was probably frowned upon.
And I know that for a fact it was the case with Emma, because Grandma Enos, Grandma Lois, she did tell, she would say that to, me and my sister Jill when we got older. She made a few comments about that. Our great uncle Joe Kerwin, which was our grandma's brother, did a lot of research into it, and so he had a lot of paperwork on, the history of the family. He knew some of the stories from Charlie, his father, and they would go to these farms that Moses had and spend time there. So they weren't that far down in the generations where they had like immediate knowledge of Pierre, because that was, Emma's grandpa.
Pauquette was a successful entrepreneur in the Portage Métis community and was also a multilingual translator who stood in the gap as cultures converged at Portage. This position was a challenging place to be.
And I can imagine it was probably very hard to balance between, finding his place in the midst of just the battle that was going on.
Being an interpreter and sitting there with the chiefs and going to Washington, D.C., and being in that position to be right in the midst of all of that stuff is, to me, it's mind-blowing. There was a lot of responsibility on him. And, and then to have it come back and be dealing with both sides. And then it's like, okay, now we think you were wrong and you're more favoring them. And oh no, you're wrong in favoring them. I mean, I don't think there was ever probably a place where he felt totally good all the time, about any of that stuff. Yeah, especially with what was going on at that time.
Pierre Pauquette ventured and lost most of his substantial estate, in part because of major debts incurred just prior to his own early death, as he provided to Ho-Chunk families who called on him as a relative for aid during a time of famine and disease. Being a woman and part indigenous, his widow and her children are left dependent and under the authority of a probate guardian.
Just to learn all the things he was involved with, and that he gave part of his money and fortune to help save parts of the Ho-Chunk tribe. It's interesting that we learned about that, because if you were to know like some of the things that our family has done, there's just like this humanitarian sort of vibe in our family where we're always helping people, and to know that he did that to help preserve the people is way more important than any asset he could have kept, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, it's his character.
Yeah.
Showed his integrity and honor and the kindness, I think, and really in the end, those are the things that matter the most.
Because Teresa didn't have any rights as a woman and a Native American, we feel like some of our heritage was taken from our family just for that reason, because Pauquette died. And people know and have documented a lot of what he had, and he was a very wealthy man. And, again, because of Teresa being a woman, she doesn't get it. They had guardians of the kids.
The Pauquette family had been deeded hundreds of acres of land as a result of Ho-Chunk treaties, land which all more or less slipped away following his death. The significance of place sticks in the minds of Michelle and Elizabeth as they reflect.
But Portage, I think, just because I've lived here and been, around the area and stuff, I often, and I just knowing that part of our ancestry was here with the Ho-Chunk people and with Pierre and everything, and just thinking about what he went through, what our family went through, and just the people in the area, and how difficult that it must have been. Like, I mean, I know how hard it was for us to leave the farm after the divorce, and so I can't, after our parents were divorced, and so I can't even imagine, like, everything that and you're being forced off. You don't want to leave, you're being forced away. And just thinking about how that felt and how horrible and sad, and and that our relative was trying to save a piece and help his people too to be able to stay, And
if you look at his actions, though, it spoke to the fact that he was trying to keep people alive, and he was trying to keep lands and things like that, and and even just walking around on the land, sometimes we do feel angry. We feel angry, that all these things happen. We came into this place, and, and I'm always, I don't know, I feel very emotional sometimes when I come in and I see stuff and what the history is. But when I found out that Pierre's house was right over here, and, I walked out there and everything, and to know that you're walking on the same land as your ancestors walked on, to me, it's really emotional, and, you feel things, and I had to take my shoes off and just be on the land, and feel it. And then you wonder kind of too, because things have changed over time, like how much the history is accurate and what are the real stories. And then, of course, the people who were in charge got to write the history. And so then you only get to know a little bit about what your family told you. And if you're not supposed to talk about it, then you know even less.